Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Raja Miswara. You can call me Adit. I'm 16 years old, on way to the 17. I'm from 11th grade of RPLC. And today's video, I want to share some of my knowledge about racism. So I give an task to tell a 30 minutes presentation. I'll wait for a while. To tell a 30 minutes presentation which is about racism. This is my topic. Okay, so let's just get started. So, uh, people are known the definition of racism only by TV or by website, but this is the real definition of racism. What is it? The definition of racism is the marginalization and or oppression of people of color or colored people based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. And, and there are 2 points that related to racism. What is it? It's a race. What is the definition of a race? Refers to the categories into which society places individuals on the basis of physical characteristics such as skin color, hair type, facial form, and eye shape. So many believe that race is determined by biology. It is now widely accepted that this classification system was in fact created for social and political reasons. There are actually more genetic and biological differences within the racial groups divided by society than between different groups. And then the second point is the systemic racism. What is the definition of systemic racism? Uh, It is a combination of systems, institutions, and factors that advantage white people and colored people, cause widespread harm and disadvantages in access and opportunity. One person, or even one group or one community of people, do not create systemic racism. Rather, it is grounded in the history of our laws and institutions which were create on the foundation of white supremacy. White supremacy exists in the institution and policies that advantage white people and disadvantage people of color or colored people and take place in interpersonal communication and behavior. Example, slurs, bullying, and offensive language. That maintains and supports systemic inequalities and systemic racism. In those definitions, team the term "white supremacy" refers to the systemic marginalization or oppression of people of color or colored people based on a racial hierarchy that privileges people who identify as white. It does not refer to extremist ideology which believe that white people are genetically or culturally superior to non-whites, nor that white people should live in a whites-only society or whites-only country. So, okay, so let's just continue to the second point. What is racism legal? The answer is not. Okay, so many people still doesn't know uh, which one is legal and which one is illegal. They just combine it, so they still do some of racism that they doesn't know is it a racism thing or not. But the answer is no. Racism is illegal because uh, God created us in equality. Okay, we are the same person, the same thing. Uh, People in Indonesia call it. We have the same main food. Like we do eat rice. All of people, we do eat rice. The same food, the same main food. Okay, so God created us in equality. So stop being racist and start to accept all of uh, the category of people, like, uh, example, if they are black skin or half Chinese, or yeah, just white people, just accept it. And there's another point, which is racist or religious hate incidents. What is it? Is it something is a racist or religious hate incident if the victim or anyone else thinks that it was carried out because of hostility or prejudice based on a race or religion? This means that if you believe something is a hate incident, it should be recorded as such by the person you are reporting it to. Who can be the victim of a racist and religious incident? Anyone can be victim of a racist or religious hate incident. For example, someone may wrongly believe you are part of a certain racial group, or someone may target you because of your partner's religion. And what does racial or religious group mean? A racial group means a group of a people who are defined by reference to their race, skin color, nationality, or ethnic or national origin. This includes gypsies, travelers, the refugees, and the asylum seekers, and also the Jews and the Sikhs. What type of incident can be racist religious hate incident? So the racist or religious hate incidents can take many forms, including verbal and physical abuse, bullying, threatening behavior, online abuse, and damage to property. It can be one-off incidents or part of an ongoing campaign of harassment or intimidation. Hate incidents are not only carried out by strangers, it could be carried out by a career, a neighbor, a teacher, or someone considered a friend. When is racist or religious hate incidents also hate crime? When racist or religious hate incidents become a criminal offense, they are known as hate crimes. Any criminal offense can be a racist or religious hate crime. If the offender targets you because of their prejudice or hostility based on a race or religion, there are two main types of racist and religious hate crime. First one, racially or religiously aggravated offense under the Crime and Disorder Act in 1998. The second point is any other offense for which the sentence can be increased under the Criminal Justice Act of 2003 if they are classed as a hate crime. In both cases, when a criminal offense is classed as a racist or religious hate crime, the judge can impose a tougher sentence on the offender. Remember that incident you've suffered may still be a crime, even if it's difficult to show it was carried out because of hostility based on race or religion. Okay, let's just get to the last part, is racist, an unfinished part of history. The residential segregation and the linchpin of racial division and separation. By segregation, I mean the separation of groups into neighborhoods dominated by members of a single racial or ethnic group. In most northeastern and midwestern metropolitan areas, as in the nation, the degree of black-white racial separation in the residents remains high despite evidence of shifting white attitudes about race. Despite successful court challenges to programs that perpetuated racial segregation, such as Shelley v. Kramer in 1948, which ruled that racially restrictive covenants were unenforceable, and Hills v. Gutierrez in 1976, which ruled against racially isolated public housing projects, and despite the Fair Housing Act of 1968 and litigation against discrimination in rental and real estate practice in the last 3 decades. At the opening of the 21st century, the 15 most segregated metropolitan areas in the United States were in the Northeast and Midwest, a half-century after the Supreme Court struck down separate and equal schools as unconstitutional. Racial segregation is still the norm in northern public schools. The five states with highest rates of school segregation are outside the South: New York, the New Jersey, Illinois, Michigan, and California. The degree of black-white segregation has tended to lessen in communities with small black populations, areas around military bases, reflecting the racial heterogeneity of the armed service, and university towns, but in a country where residential segregation is still the norm, these places are anomalous. Residential segregation by race has deep roots in private real estate practices, in American public policy, and in grassroots activism, especially by white homeowners, to maintain residential segregation. It is important not to draw a bright line between past and present, for the history of official and unofficial acts of housing discrimination has set into place patterns of racial separation that have been difficult to uproot, and has fostered major racial inequalities, particularly in multigenerational wealth accumulation. The deep roots of housing segregation. What is it? Patterns of residential segregation were set into place with the development of racially restrictive covenants in the late 19th and early 20th century. Included in deeds and enforced in civil codes, restrictive covenants controlled how a property could be developed, how it could be used, and who could live there. A device to preserve a neighborhood's homogeneity, covenants often specified a minimum lot size, forbade multiple family housing, and by so doing priced out poor and working class purchasers. Other restrictions further blocked access by high-income residents. In the early 20th century, when most working-class people, especially rural migrants, kept chickens or pigs as a matter of survival, suburban developers put restrictions on household animals, not just to keep out squealing pigs, but their owners too. By the 1920s, restrictive language grew more specific in categorizing not just undesirable uses but undesirable users. By the 1920s, this in nearly every new housing development in the North prevented in the use of ownership of house by people other than the Caucasian race. Using the racial argot of the day, covenants variously forbade home sales or rentals to African, Negroes, and Ethiopians, and less frequently Asians. Mexicans and Jews. It was not until 1948 that Supreme Court Shelley v. Kramer ruled that restrictive covenants were legally enforceable, but even in the absence of restrictive covenants, real estate brokers staunchly defend the practice of racial segregation from the 1930s through the 1960s. The National Association of Real Estate Boards, which trademarked the name "realtor", issued ethical guidelines that specified that a realtor should never be instrumental in introducing to a neighborhood a character of a property or occupancy. Members of any race or nationality, or any individual whose presence will be clearly detrimental to property values in the neighborhood, lest there by any confusion. An industry brochure offered guidance: the prospective buyer might be a bootlegger who would cause considerable annoyance to his neighbors, a madam who had a number of callers on her string, a gangster who on a screen for his activities by living in a better neighborhood, a colored man of means who was giving his children a college education, thought they were entitled to live among whites, no matter what the motive or character of the would-be purchaser. If the deal would institute a form of blight, then certainly the well-meaning broker must work against its consummation. Private real estate practice alone did not shape the metropolitan landscape of segregation federal housing programs, especially those introduced in the New Deal, mixed the gravel of racism into the mortar of public policy. FDR made the reform of the housing market one of the linchpin of his social policy. To that end, the government created the Home Owners Loan Corporation, called HOLC, in 1933. I think, yeah, I remember 1933, which provide low-interest loans to homeowners at risk of foreclosure. In 1934, Roosevelt signed legislation creating the Federal Housing Administration, which fully restructured the American mortgage market. The FHA, and for returning veterans after World War II, the Veterans Administration guaranteed mortgages from default. These government programs fully remade America's real estate and banking industry by minimizing the risk of home loans. Federal guarantees allowed lenders to package long-term, usually 30-year mortgages at low interest rates. More than that, the FHA provide crucial financial support to the housing industry. Without federal intervention in the housing market, massive suburbanization would have been impossible. In 1930, only 30% of Americans owned their own house. Uh, it, in 1930, okay, the percent of Americans owned their house. Okay, by 1960, more than 60% were homeowners. Home ownership became an emblem of American citizenship. Federally backed loans and mortgages were, however, seldom available to residents of racially mixed or transitional neighborhoods. The presence of even a single black family rendered a whole neighborhood actuarially unsound. To assist lenders, the HOLC prepared neighborhood security maps. The maps were elaborately drawn and backed up with a detailed description of a neighborhood, housing stock, and racial, ethnic, and class composition. The best neighborhood, denoted A and B, were colored green and blue. The riskiest neighborhoods were denoted C and B and colored yellow and red. If in harmonious racial and ethnic group live in the neighborhood, stability would be at risk. Residents in neighborhoods with an old housing stock at risk of transition to lower class occupancy, or with even a handful of black residents were marked D and were usually eligible for FHA-backed loans to preserve stability. FHA officials supported the use of restrictive covenants, compounding the discriminatory effects of the housing policy were federal experiments in the public housing during the New Deal and Truman's Fair Deal. 1973 Wagner-Steagall Housing Act created the U.S. Housing Authority, fulfilling Roosevelt's pledge to assist the one-third of the national ill-housed. The USHA made real inroads, providing affordable housing for blacks, but with few exceptions by segregating public housing programs, while federally funded, were locally administered. Public officials in the northern cities chose the cities for housing projects and enforced eligibility requirements. In Every major northern city public housing projects were sited in deference to local housing patterns. The few-color projects usually adjoined segregated neighborhoods or were built on a marginal than near waterfronts, industries, sites, railroad, track, or highways. Blacks' pent-up demand for housing remained unfulfilled, reinforcing confidence and racially discriminatory lending policies were extrajudicial action. Whites fought tenaciously to keep undesirable out of their neighborhood as blacks migrated northward. Man, that's bad. Whites had economic reasons to resist the Negro invasion, as they called it. Their ability to secure mortgages and loans was at risk, but their motivation were not solely economic, intertwined with concerns about property values were fears of black predation. Above all, um, whites both north and south recoiled at the prospect of miscegenation. In the south, those fears were allayed through legal restrictions of intermarriage and racial mixing in the public place. In the north, those fears were addressed by the regulation of housing markets. Whites protested, picked, and used violence to keep blacks out of their neighborhood, out to prevent the construction of racially integrated public housing projects in their community, and to resist the development of affordable housing open to minorities. Cross-burning, arson, window breakings, and mobs greeted black newcomers to white neighborhoods in nearly every major northern city between the 1920 exactly and the 1960, and Detroit between 1945 when Indonesia are independence and in this 1965. Nearly 200 weight neighborhood associations, most with the explicit purpose of keeping blacks away. They just keeping blacks away. In Chicago, mobs of angry whites beset blacks who had the temerity to cross the city's sharply defined neighborhood color lines in hundreds of racial incidents. In the 1966, when the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., yes, our hero, Martin Luther King Jr., led open housing marches in white Chicago neighborhoods. Her, no, he and fellow nonviolent protesters were pelted with bricks and stones. Man, that's thrilling. In Philadelphia, blacks who breached neighborhood boundaries were often victims of physical attacks and racial incidents, plagued racially changing neighborhoods as late as the 1990s, even if the intensity and frequency of violence toward black newcomers been warned after 1960s in most metropolitan areas. Mostly, survey research show that African Americans continue to perceive many neighborhoods and suburban communities as hostile and unwelcoming because of their white residents. Historic history of racial violence, while many whites stay their ground. Many more decamp when blacks more nearby, and many more simply avoid racial mixed cities altogether. The mass migration of whites to suburbia resulted in staggering change. Between 1950s and 1970, there are 700,000 whites moved to Philadelphia suburbs at the same time that the city lost 125,000 whites and gained 153,000 blacks. Again, suburban Chicago gained more than 1 million whites, but the city lost 399,000 whites and gained 320,000 blacks people. During the same period, the number of black suburbanites grew very slowly. Most blacks had no choice but to live in the central cities. Those who suburbanized were confined to established black uh, enclaves. As a consequence of the exclusion areas, as a consequence of uh, black exclusion from many suburban areas, northern metropolitan are area that divided by many invisible lines of race. Okay, from that, uh, from that whole point, my conclusion is you don't have to be racist or doing a racist or being racist because yeah, from the start I tell you that God created us with equality. We are the same race, but only with a different religion, different skin colors, different face type, different eye shape. Yeah, there's a lot. God won't create us with the all of people are with the same face and same religion. No, uh, when the religion they are, get their religion from their neighborhood or from their family. So if from the start there was a Christian or a Buddhist or Islam, they will get or they will be out of their religion because of their neighborhood, their teachers, or their parents, even if their parents or a friend. And a skin, God won't create us without a different skin because yeah man there's a lot of population in this world. You just can't hate all of them because they are just different, had a different religion and different skins color uh, uh, from you because don't think that you are a white people or your black people are better than the opposite. So we just have to live in peace because if we live in peace, this world may be a peace and a safe place for every human race and every people, so we can live together at the same roof or maybe at the same world where peace spread into all of the areas of in the world. Okay, so that's my conclusion for the whole presentation. I think you're gonna get it, the conclusion and the lessons that we can take from this presentation. And also, uh, the last will be don't be don't being a racist people. Respect all of their race, and I'm ready to as well. Will say sorry if there's a lot of mistakes in this video or in this presentation. Uh, Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support and cooperation, and thank you for listening. And I'm Muhammad Raditya Maswara. Say Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you on the next video. Bye.